In 1863, oil was not power, it was chaos. Western Pennsylvania was filled with wooden derricks, mud roads, burning wells. Men chased fortune like gamblers chasing lightning. Oil prices swung wildly. 1 month a barrel was worth a fortune. The next, it was nearly worthless. Wells flooded the market. Storage overflowed. Refiners went bankrupt. Railroads gouged prices. Speculators made and lost fortunes overnight. It was not an industry, it was disorder. In Cleveland, Ohio, a quiet 24-year-old bookkeeper was watching. John Davison Rockefeller did not see oil as a lottery. He saw it as a ledger. He did not believe in chaos. He believed in order. Raised by a deeply religious mother and a father who survived through manipulation. Rockefeller absorbed two opposing traits: moral certainty and ruthless calculation. He would later insist that God had chosen him to bring order to industry. Where others saw oil wells, Rockefeller saw inefficiency. Where others drilled, he refined. That distinction changed the world. Drilling was speculative, refining was controllable. In 1863, Rockefeller invested $4,000 into a refinery in Cleveland. Cleveland was not chosen randomly. It sat at a transportation crossroads. It had rail access. It had lake access. It had infrastructure. Within 2 years, Rockefeller's refinery was the largest in Cleveland. But that wasn't because he drilled better. It was because he calculated better. He tracked every cost, every barrel, every leakage percentage, every transportation fee. While competitors operated on instinct, Rockefeller operated on numbers. He squeezed inefficiencies out of refining the way a chemist purifies compounds. But efficiency was not enough, because efficiency inside chaos is fragile. Rockefeller did not want to win in a competitive market. He wanted to remove the market itself. This was the psychological shift that separated him from every other oil man. Most businessmen seek advantage. Rockefeller sought control. He noticed something simple but profound. Competition destroys capital. When too many refineries produce too much kerosene, prices collapse. Everyone loses money. It is irrational. It is wasteful. Rockefeller concluded that competition itself was the problem. And if competition was the problem, consolidation was the solution. By 1870, Rockefeller formed the Standard Oil Company of Ohio. At that time, he controlled roughly 4% of American refining capacity. Within 10 years, he controlled 90%. That leap did not happen because oil demand exploded. It happened because Rockefeller systematically removed alternatives. He negotiated secret shipping rebates with railroads. He secured lower transport costs than competitors. Sometimes railroads even paid him drawbacks, fees collected from competitors. This gave Rockefeller a structural cost advantage before a single barrel was refined. Then he reinvested profits aggressively. He modernized plants faster than competitors. He negotiated bulk purchasing discounts. He demanded efficiency everywhere. And slowly, one by one, competitors found themselves unable to match his prices. Rockefeller would approach refinery owners calmly. He offered them a choice: sell to Standard Oil and receive stock, often generous stock, or refuse, and face a price war you cannot survive. This was not emotion, it was arithmetic. Many resisted, few survived. Rockefeller did not see this as cruelty. He saw it as purification. He once said, competition is a sin, not as metaphor, as theology. He believed disorder was immoral, consolidation was righteous, and so he built something new, not just a company, a system, a method, a blueprint. He discovered that if you control supply chains, eliminate rivals, dominate logistics, and reinvest relentlessly, you do not merely compete, you become infrastructure. By the late 1870s, Standard Oil was not just another oil company, it was oil. And this is where the story shifts from biography to architecture, because Rockefeller's greatest invention was not kerosene efficiency. It was structural dominance, and once that structure existed, it did not disappear in 1911. It evolved. And in 2026, you still live inside it. Vertical integration, control the entire chain. Rockefeller understood something most businessmen in the 1860s did not. Profit isn't just made at the point of sale, it's made at every step before the sale. In the early oil industry, refining was fragmented. One company drilled oil, another transported it. Another made barrels, another stored it, another distributed it. Each layer took a margin. Each layer added cost and introduced unpredictability. Rockefeller saw weakness in this fragmentation. If he controlled only refining, he was vulnerable to every supplier above and below him. So he made a decision that would become the foundation of modern corporate power: control the entire chain. This is vertical integration, and in the 1870s, it was revolutionary. Rockefeller began buying barrel factories. Instead of paying 25 cents per barrel to independent suppliers, Standard Oil produced its own for closer to 15 cents. That difference meant dominance. He purchased storage facilities, bought pipelines, and invested in tank cars for rail transport. He negotiated exclusive freight contracts. Railroads were desperate for stable, high-volume clients. Rockefeller offered them certainty, massive shipping volume, in exchange for rebates and preferential rates. Sometimes, railroads secretly charged Standard Oil's competitors higher rates, then kicked back a portion to Rockefeller. This was not illegal at the time. It was strategic. Competitors paid more to ship their oil than Rockefeller, and in some cases, he profited from their shipments. This gave Standard Oil a structural advantage that competitors could not replicate. Then he expanded further. He controlled wholesale distribution. He opened regional offices. He tracked market demand city by city. He refined byproducts that competitors discarded. While others wasted petroleum jelly and paraffin, Rockefeller monetized them. Nothing left the refinery unused. Efficiency was not an afterthought. It was doctrine. By integrating vertically, Rockefeller lowered his cost per barrel below anyone else in the country. And here's the key principle. Once your cost base is the lowest, you control price. He could lower kerosene prices to levels competitors could not match without losing money. They could not survive a prolonged price war. He reaches past the competition. And this is the modern lesson. Vertical integration is not about efficiency alone. It is about resilience. When you control suppliers, logistics, production, and distribution, you are insulated from shocks. Amazon does this today. It owns warehouses, trucks, cargo aircraft, data centers, and its marketplace. It hosts competitors' websites on AWS while competing against them in retail. It processes payments. It controls fulfillment. This is Rockefeller's logic, updated with servers instead of barrels. Apple designs hardware, software, processors, and its own retail distribution. Tesla manufactures batteries, vehicles, software, and operates charging infrastructure. Google controls search, advertising, cloud computing, mobile operating systems, and video platforms. Vertical integration is not an accident of scale. It is the blueprint. Rockefeller proved that once you remove dependencies, you remove vulnerability. And once you remove vulnerability, you remove competition's leverage. But vertical integration alone does not create monopoly. It creates advantage. To eliminate competition entirely, Rockefeller needed a second move, horizontal consolidation. And that move would turn Cleveland into a graveyard. Horizontal consolidation, eliminate or absorb. Vertical integration made Rockefeller efficient. Horizontal consolidation made him unstoppable. By the early 1870s, Rockefeller controlled the supply chain inside his own operations. His refining costs were the lowest in America. His logistics were optimized. His waste was minimal. His margins were protected. But there was still a problem: competition. Cleveland alone had dozens of refineries. Pittsburgh had more. New York, Philadelphia, Baltimore. Oil refining was a booming, chaotic industry. Anyone with capital could build a refinery. That chaos meant unstable prices. And Rockefeller hated instability. He believed competition wasn't healthy. He believed it was destructive. He believed too many producers led to price crashes, bankruptcies, and wasted capital. In his mind, consolidation wasn't greed, it was order. So he began what historians would later call the Cleveland Massacre of 1872. The name sounds violent. It wasn't physical. It was financial. Rockefeller approached every refinery owner in Cleveland. He offered them a deal: sell your refinery to Standard Oil. In exchange, you receive stock in Standard Oil or a fair cash price. You get stability. You get a stake in something larger. You stop worrying about price wars. If they accepted, Rockefeller welcomed them. If they refused, he went to war. He dropped prices. He flooded markets. He leveraged his lower costs and railroad rebates to undercut them. Competitors were forced to sell kerosene at a loss just to stay alive. They had no integrated supply chain, no secret rebates, no scale. They burned cash. Rockefeller did not. After months of pressure, most folded. Within 3 months, Rockefeller absorbed 22 of Cleveland's 26 refineries, from 4% national refining share to 25% in one city in 1 year. And this became the second pillar of the Rockefeller blueprint: offer to acquire. If refused, apply pressure until surrender, then absorb the remains. This tactic wasn't random aggression. It was strategic. Every acquired refinery meant fewer competitors. Every eliminated rival meant greater pricing control. Every consolidation increased Standard Oil's influence over the market. By the late 1870s, Rockefeller expanded this strategy nationwide. He moved into Pittsburgh, New York, Philadelphia, Baltimore. He bought competitors or crushed them. By 1879, Standard Oil controlled roughly 90% of America's oil refining capacity. 90%. That's not market leadership. That's market domination. But Rockefeller wasn't just acquiring assets. He was acquiring knowledge. Every competitor he absorbed brought trade secrets, regional relationships, supplier data, and technical expertise. He centralized it all. Standard Oil became a machine of information. They tracked demand patterns, transportation routes, supplier reliability, consumer price sensitivity. This wasn't brute force capitalism. It was intelligence-driven consolidation. And this method did not disappear in 1911. It evolved. Look at Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, all acquired. Potential competitors neutralized before they could threaten the core platform. Look at Google, YouTube, Android, DoubleClick, DeepMind. Each acquisition eliminated risk. Look at pharmaceutical companies. Buy promising biotech startups before they can become independent threats. Look at banks. Regional banks are absorbed by national giants. Horizontal consolidation is modern capitalism's reflex, buy or bury. And here's the psychological genius of Rockefeller. He framed consolidation as stability. He argued that eliminating competition lowered prices for consumers, and in many cases, it did. Before Standard Oil, kerosene was volatile and expensive. After consolidation, it became cheap and consistent, from 58 cents per gallon to around 8 cents. That wasn't theft, that was scale. This is the moral paradox of monopoly. It creates efficiency. It also creates control. The public hated Rockefeller. Journalists called him ruthless, but consumers benefited from lower prices. And that complexity made him harder to attack politically. He wasn't just crushing competitors, he was delivering affordability. And this duality still defines monopolies in 2026. Amazon lowers prices. Google offers free services. Apple integrates ecosystems. Meta connects billions. Efficiency at scale. Control at the top. But Rockefeller knew something else. Dominance alone wasn't enough. Monopolies attract regulators. And once the government sees your power, it eventually responds. So Rockefeller invented something even more important than consolidation. He invented structure, a legal architecture that could survive attack. And that architecture was called the trust. The trust, inventing corporate immortality. By the early 1880s, Rockefeller had achieved what few businessmen in history ever had. He controlled nearly 90% of American oil refining. He controlled supply chains, distribution, and pricing. But he had a problem, not competition, but the government. Public anger was rising and journalists were investigating. State laws prevented corporations from owning businesses across state lines. Standard Oil was no longer a single Ohio company. It was a national empire, operating in multiple states. Rockefeller needed a structure for centralized control without violating state law. So in 1882, his lawyers invented something that would change corporate history forever: the Standard Oil Trust. Here's how it worked. Instead of Standard Oil directly owning all subsidiaries, Rockefeller transferred shares of various state-level oil companies into a single trust. A group of trustees, loyal to Rockefeller, held those shares. In exchange, shareholders received trust certificates. The trust controlled everything. It set policy, determined production levels, directed pricing, and coordinated strategy across state lines. On paper, the companies were separate. In reality, they operated as one organism. This was revolutionary. The trust wasn't just a business structure. It was an innovation in power consolidation. It allowed Rockefeller to centralize decision-making, while technically complying with fragmented state laws. And more importantly, it insulated leadership from direct liability. This was the birth of the modern holding company. Every corporate parent you recognize today follows this structure. Alphabet owns Google, YouTube, Waymo, DeepMind. Meta owns Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp. Berkshire Hathaway owns dozens of subsidiaries. They are legal descendants of the Standard Oil Trust. Rockefeller didn't just dominate oil. He engineered corporate immortality. The trust structure accomplished three critical things. First, it centralized control. No regional manager could act independently. Everything flowed upward. Second, it shielded liability. If one subsidiary faced legal trouble, the parent structure remained protected. Third, it complicated regulation. Regulators struggled to define what exactly they were prosecuting. Was it the trust? The subsidiaries? The trustees? The law had never seen anything like this before. And that confusion bought Rockefeller time. But the trust did something even more profound. It separated ownership from operation. Shareholders no longer managed day-to-day business. They owned certificates. Trustees managed operations. This professionalized corporate governance. It turned business from personal enterprise into institutional power. And institutions outlive individuals. This is why Rockefeller's influence survived him. The trust system became embedded in corporate law. By the 1890s, trusts were everywhere. The Sugar Trust, the Tobacco Trust, the Steel Trust, each copied Rockefeller's blueprint. Congress passed the Sherman Antitrust Act in 1890 to combat these monopolies. But the law was vague. It prohibited restraint of trade. It didn't define what that meant. Rockefeller's lawyers exploited the ambiguity. The trust structure slowed enforcement. It fragmented legal challenges. It extended Standard Oil's dominance by decades. And here's the irony. When the Supreme Court finally ordered Standard Oil broken up in 1911, the trust structure made it possible. Because the subsidiaries were already legally distinct. Breaking them apart was a matter of redistributing shares. The trust made disassembly possible. But it didn't eliminate control. Rockefeller still owned stock in all 34 new companies. Exxon, Mobil, Chevron, Amoco, Conoco. The pieces were smaller, but collectively they were worth more. The breakup multiplied Rockefeller's wealth, from roughly $900 million to an equivalent of over $400 billion in modern purchasing power. The system adapted. It survived regulation. It emerged stronger. And this is the Rockefeller lesson modern corporations absorbed. When regulators attack, restructure. When monopoly is illegal, decentralize ownership. When public anger rises, change form, not control. Today, tech giants operate through labyrinthine holding structures. Pharmaceutical conglomerates spin off divisions. Financial institutions separate retail banking from investment arms. Not to weaken power, but to preserve it. Rockefeller's trust was not just a legal workaround, it was a philosophy. Power must be layered, control must be indirect, ownership must be dispersed on paper, but centralized in reality. This is corporate immortality, a structure that cannot be killed by breaking up a single entity, because the power doesn't reside in the name, it resides in the method. But Rockefeller understood something else. Even the most brilliant structure cannot survive without public legitimacy. The trust protected him legally, it did not protect him reputationally. By the early 1900s, Rockefeller was the most hated man in America. He was called a robber baron, a tyrant, an enemy of competition. Public opinion was turning, and Rockefeller realized that monopoly without moral authority was unstable. So he invented something even more powerful than the trust: philanthropy as power. Philanthropy, buying legitimacy, shaping the future. By the early 1900s, John D. Rockefeller had achieved what no private citizen ever had. He had built the largest monopoly in American history. He had centralized control over an entire industry. He had become the richest man alive. But he had also become the most hated. Newspapers called him a predator. Cartoons depicted him as an octopus wrapping its tentacles around Congress. Ida, Tarbell's investigative series, exposed his railroad rebates, predatory pricing, and ruthless tactics. The public outrage was real. Rockefeller understood something critical. Economic power without moral legitimacy is unstable. So he executed the most sophisticated rebranding strategy in modern history. He became a philanthropist. In 1913, Rockefeller founded the Rockefeller Foundation with an endowment of $100 million, an astronomical sum at the time. Adjusted for inflation, that's roughly $3 billion in early 20th century purchasing power, equivalent to tens of billions today. This was not casual charity. This was institutional philanthropy. Structured, permanent, tax-advantaged, strategic. And here's why it mattered. The foundation was legally separate from Rockefeller personally. Money transferred into it was no longer taxable. It avoided estate taxes. It protected wealth across generations. It allowed Rockefeller to shape public policy indirectly. Philanthropy became a new layer of power. The foundation funded universities. It funded medical schools. It funded research institutions. It funded public health initiatives. It funded agricultural modernization. On the surface, this was benevolence, and in many ways, it was. The Rockefeller Foundation helped eradicate hookworm. It funded breakthroughs in medical research. It supported public education reform. But look deeper. The foundation didn't just fund medicine, it standardized it. In 1910, the Flexner Report restructured American medical education. Medical schools were required to meet strict scientific and pharmaceutical standards. Hundreds of small, holistic, and alternative medical schools closed. The new model emphasized laboratory research and pharmaceutical intervention. This professionalized medicine. It improved standards. But it also aligned medical practice with pharmaceutical production, an industry deeply connected to Standard Oil's chemical divisions. The oil empire's chemical expertise expanded into pharmaceuticals. Petrochemicals became the foundation of modern drug manufacturing. The line between industrial chemistry and medicine blurred. This was not sinister. It was structural. Rockefeller didn't force medicine to change. He funded the version that aligned with industrial chemistry, and that version became dominant. This is how philanthropy shapes markets. You don't outlaw alternatives. You fund your preferred model until it becomes standard. Universities funded by Rockefeller grants produced graduates trained in a particular framework. Those graduates staffed hospitals, agencies, and research institutions. Over time, the framework became normal. This is regulatory capture at the cultural level, and it was brilliant. The most hated monopolist in America became the patron of science and education. Newspapers stopped calling him a robber baron. They called him a benefactor. His public image transformed. His monopoly methods were condemned. But his philanthropic legacy was celebrated. And modern billionaires copied the blueprint. Bill Gates built the Gates Foundation. Mark Zuckerberg built the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative. Jeff Bezos created the Bezos Earth Fund. Warren Buffett pledged his fortune to philanthropic institutions. The structure is identical. Accumulate wealth through consolidation, transfer large portions into tax-advantaged foundations, shape policy indirectly through grants and influence, buy legitimacy, extend influence beyond business into governance. The foundation model accomplishes three things simultaneously. It reduces tax liability. It preserves family control over capital. It shapes public systems, health, education, research, without direct political office. Rockefeller's philanthropy did not replace his monopoly power. It insulated it. It reframed it. It made it untouchable. When Standard Oil was broken up in 1911, the foundation remained intact. When critics attacked corporate concentration, Rockefeller pointed to hospitals and universities bearing his name. Power shifted from industrial dominance to institutional influence, and that influence persists today. Rockefeller University, the University of Chicago, Johns Hopkins, the Rockefeller Brothers Fund, the Rockefeller Family Fund. The legacy is everywhere. And here's the critical insight. Rockefeller did not just invent corporate monopoly, he invented moral monopoly. The idea that concentrated private wealth can shape public institutions more effectively than democratic systems. This is not conspiracy, this is architecture. The foundation model is now embedded in global capitalism. Wealth accumulates. Foundations institutionalize it. Policy is influenced. Markets are shaped. Reputation is repaired. The cycle continues. And this is why Rockefeller's system is so durable. Vertical integration gives economic power. Horizontal consolidation gives market dominance. Trust structures give legal protection. Philanthropy gives legitimacy. Together, they form a complete ecosystem of control. But Rockefeller's greatest innovation wasn't oil. It wasn't the trust. It wasn't even philanthropy. It was proving that breaking up a monopoly doesn't destroy it. It transforms it. And the transformation of Standard Oil in 1911 would teach every future corporation a critical lesson. Breakups can be profitable. Regulation can be navigated. And power can survive structural change. The breakup that made him richer. In 1911, the United States Supreme Court ruled that Standard Oil was an illegal monopoly. After decades of public anger, investigative journalism, and political pressure, the government finally acted. Standard Oil was ordered to dissolve, to be broken apart, to be dismantled into 34 separate companies. To most Americans, this looked like justice. The monopolist had been defeated. The octopus had been cut into pieces. Competition would return, markets would open, power would decentralize. That's what the public believed. But here's what actually happened. Rockefeller still owned shares in every single one of those 34 companies. When the court forced Standard Oil to separate, it distributed shares of the new independent companies to existing shareholders, primarily Rockefeller and his associates. Standard Oil of New Jersey became Exxon. Standard Oil of New York became Mobil. Standard Oil of California became Chevron. Standard Oil of Indiana became Amoco. Standard Oil of Ohio became Sohio, later acquired by BP. Each new company inherited assets, infrastructure, refining capacity, and regional dominance. They weren't small startups entering a competitive market. They were regional monopolies, operating independently. And here's the critical detail. Once separated, these companies began competing, not for survival, but for efficiency. They innovated, they expanded internationally, they improved distribution networks, they explored new oil fields, and investors saw opportunity. The combined market value of the 34 companies exceeded the value of Standard Oil as a single entity. Before the breakup, Standard Oil stock traded around $600 per share. After the breakup, the aggregate value of the shares exceeded $2,000 per share. Rockefeller's net worth tripled. The attempt to destroy the monopoly made its founder richer than ever. This is the paradox modern corporations studied carefully. Antitrust enforcement doesn't necessarily destroy wealth. It can unlock it. It can reprice it. It can fragment power publicly while preserving ownership privately. Rockefeller had created a structure so flexible that it could survive dismemberment, because the real power wasn't in the name Standard Oil. It was in the ownership structure, in the shareholding, in the system. The breakup did not dismantle vertical integration. It did not erase economies of scale. It did not eliminate market dominance. It redistributed it. And over the next century, many of those companies quietly reconsolidated. Exxon merged with Mobil in 1999. Chevron acquired Gulf Oil and Texaco. BP acquired Amoco and Sohio. The branches of the original Standard Oil tree slowly intertwined again. Different names, same roots. This taught corporate America something essential. If regulators break you up, ensure the pieces remain powerful. If forced to decentralize, preserve shareholder control. If public pressure demands reform, change structure, not dominance. The modern corporate world internalized this lesson. When AT&T was broken up in 1984, the baby bells later reconsolidated. When tech companies face antitrust scrutiny, they reorganize subsidiaries. When banks are fined or restructured, they maintain holding company frameworks. The Rockefeller blueprint proved something radical. Monopoly is not fragile. It is adaptive. It evolves. It survives fragmentation and often emerges stronger. But there's a deeper mechanism here. The breakup also legitimized corporate concentration. After 1911, monopolies weren't eliminated. They were normalized. The government demonstrated that it could regulate excessive power. That visible enforcement reassured the public, which allowed corporate concentration to continue in new forms. The system learned how to manage outrage, how to channel reform without dismantling architecture. Rockefeller didn't fight the breakup violently. He didn't panic. He didn't resist publicly. He allowed the process to unfold. Because he understood ownership mattered more than structure. That is the ultimate lesson. Power is not destroyed by rebranding. Control is not eliminated by decentralization. And wealth does not disappear when corporations are divided. If anything, complexity shields it. Today, in 2026, corporations facing antitrust scrutiny follow the same playbook. Spin off divisions, create independent subsidiaries, shift legal ownership, restructure, rebrand. The method persists. And that method originated in 19th century oil fields. But Standard Oil was only the beginning. Rockefeller's blueprint didn't remain in energy. It migrated to finance, to pharmaceuticals, to technology, to retail. The system he refined became the template for every dominant corporation in the modern economy. And if you want to see Rockefeller's true legacy, you don't look at oil, you look at Amazon, you look at Google, you look at JP Morgan, you look at Pfizer, because they are not Standard Oil. But they operate within the system Standard Oil created. If you think Rockefeller's system died with oil, you haven't been paying attention. It didn't die. It scaled, it digitized, it globalized, and in 2026, it dominates industries Rockefeller never could have imagined. Start with Amazon. Rockefeller controlled refining, railroads, storage, and distribution. Amazon controls warehouses, shipping logistics, aircraft fleets, delivery vans, payment processing, and the cloud infrastructure that hosts its competitors' websites. That's vertical integration. Amazon Web Services alone generates over $90 billion in annual revenue. It hosts Netflix. It hosts government databases. It hosts thousands of online stores, including competitors who must rely on Amazon's infrastructure to operate. Rockefeller owned the pipelines and railroads. Amazon owns the digital pipelines. And just like Standard Oil, Amazon uses horizontal consolidation. It buys competitors, Whole Foods, Zappos, Twitch, Ring, MGM Studios. More than 100 acquisitions in 2 decades. When acquisition isn't possible, replication is. Amazon collects marketplace data from third-party sellers. It analyzes which products succeed. Then it launches Amazon Basics versions at lower prices. Competitors either sell to Amazon or compete with Amazon's own platform. The Cleveland Massacre, reimagined in digital form. Now look at Google. Standard Oil's trust became the holding company model. Alphabet is the modern trust. Google, YouTube, Waymo, DeepMind, Verily. Each legally separate, all centrally controlled. This structure shields liability. It optimizes taxation. It complicates regulation. If regulators target Google search, Alphabet shifts focus to YouTube. If YouTube faces scrutiny, investments flow to AI subsidiaries. Power diffuses legally, control remains centralized. And Google's dominance? Over 90% of global search. Standard Oil peaked at 91%. Google surpassed it, but regulators hesitate. Because Google is free, you don't pay money, you pay with data. Rockefeller monetized kerosene. Google monetizes attention. Different commodity, same structure. Now examine the pharmaceutical industry. Rockefeller's chemical divisions evolved into petrochemicals. Petrochemicals evolved into pharmaceuticals. Modern pharmaceutical giants use patent walls, regulatory influence, and vertical supply chains to dominate drug production. They fund research. They fund regulators through user fees. They influence guidelines that determine which treatments are covered by insurance. The regulatory capture Rockefeller practiced with railroad commissions now appears in healthcare policy committees. Control the rules, control the market. The financial sector follows the same architecture. JP Morgan Chase is a holding company. Bank of America is a holding company. Citigroup is a holding company. The parent entity owns subsidiaries that operate retail banking, investment banking, asset management, derivatives trading. If one division collapses, the structure shields the parent. This structure evolved directly from the Standard Oil Trust. In 2008, when banks failed, taxpayers rescued holding companies. The architecture survived. Then there's technology platforms. Meta owns Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp. 3 billion users. Horizontal consolidation. Meta bought Instagram when it was a threat, bought WhatsApp when it was a competitor. Instead of fighting competition, it absorbed it. Rockefeller offered buyouts. If refused, he launched price wars. Meta offers acquisition. If refused, it clones features. Stories, Reels, short-form video. Snapchat learned that lesson. TikTok faces it. The blueprint is identical. And here's what's critical. This isn't illegal, it's structural. Corporate law allows holding companies. Antitrust enforcement is reactive and slow. Lobbying ensures favorable regulations. Foundations and philanthropic arms buy public goodwill. Rockefeller created the model. Modern corporations perfected it. Even big tech philanthropy mirrors Rockefeller. Bill Gates funds global health initiatives. Mark Zuckerberg funds educational programs. Jeff Bezos funds climate research. These initiatives often provide genuine benefits, but they also shape policy. They influence global health standards. They influence digital education frameworks. They influence environmental regulation. Philanthropy becomes soft power, just as Rockefeller intended. Now look at oil itself. ExxonMobil, Chevron, BP, Shell. The descendants of Standard Oil still dominate global energy, and while alternative energy grows, the oligopoly remains intact. Mergers continue. In 2023 and 2024, major oil companies acquired smaller shale producers. Consolidation continues. Every year, fewer companies control more supply. Rockefeller's ghost smiles. But here's the deeper truth. The system works. It delivers efficiency. Amazon delivers products in 24 hours. Google answers questions in milliseconds. Exxon refines fuel at massive scale. Pfizer develops life-saving drugs. JP Morgan processes global transactions instantly. The consumer benefits from efficiency. The shareholder benefits from concentration. Both are true simultaneously. This is why the system persists, because it delivers convenience at scale. But it also concentrates wealth at the top, and that concentration compounds over generations. Which brings us to the final layer. Rockefeller didn't just create monopolies, he normalized them. He transformed public perception of corporate power, and he embedded the architecture so deeply that breaking it now would require dismantling corporate law itself. You don't just fight Exxon, you fight the holding company structure. You don't just regulate Amazon, you confront vertical integration. You don't just limit Meta, you challenge acquisition frameworks. Rockefeller didn't build a company, he built a template. And in 2026, that template defines the global economy. The illusion of choice, how the system extracts from you. By 2026, the Rockefeller system is no longer visible as oil refineries and railroads. It's embedded in everyday life. You wake up, you check your phone, your operating system is controlled by one of two dominant companies. You search for information. One company handles over 90% of global search traffic. You scroll social media. 3 platforms dominate global attention, all owned by a handful of corporations. You shop. Amazon controls nearly 40% of U.S. e-commerce. You buy groceries. 4 companies control the majority of U.S. food distribution. You fill your car with gasoline. Exxon, Chevron, BP, Shell, descendants of a monopoly broken up 114 years ago. You take medication. 3 pharmaceutical giants dominate most global drug production. You deposit money. 4 banks control the majority of U.S. banking assets. You are not choosing between thousands of independent competitors. You are selecting between branches of consolidated systems. Rockefeller understood something fundamental. True monopoly doesn't look like one company controlling 100%. It looks like 3 to 5 companies controlling 80%. An oligopoly, structured competition, enough rivalry to avoid public backlash, not enough to threaten dominance. Let's quantify it. The top 5 tech companies account for more than 25% of the S&P 500's total market capitalization. The top 4 banks hold over 45% of all U.S. banking assets. The top 3 pharmaceutical companies control a massive share of global vaccine and patent distribution. The top oil producers coordinate pricing through production agreements and shared infrastructure. This is not accidental. It is structural convergence. Now here's the mechanism of extraction. You spend money, a portion flows to vertically integrated corporations. Those corporations own supply chains. They own distribution. They own logistics. They own platforms. Each layer captures margin. If you buy a product on Amazon, Amazon earns marketplace fees. Amazon earns logistics fees. Amazon may host the seller's website through AWS. Amazon may advertise the product through Amazon Ads. One purchase, multiple layers of profit. Vertical integration multiplies extraction points. Rockefeller eliminated middlemen. Modern corporations eliminate external profit layers. You are not just buying a product. You are funding an ecosystem. Now consider healthcare. You pay insurance premiums. Insurance companies invest in pharmaceutical stocks. Pharmaceutical companies sell to hospitals. Hospitals are owned by corporate chains. Medical education was standardized through philanthropic funding. Each layer reinforces the other. Money circulates within concentrated structures. The Rockefeller system is not just about monopoly, it's about ecosystem control. Each dominant company becomes indispensable. Amazon for logistics, Google for search, Meta for social attention, Exxon for fuel, Pfizer for medicine, JP Morgan for capital flow. You cannot realistically opt out. Yes, alternatives exist, but they lack scale. Scale creates convenience. Convenience creates dependence. Dependence stabilizes dominance. Rockefeller once said, competition is a sin. He believed duplication wasted capital. Efficiency required consolidation. And efficiency did lower prices. Standard Oil reduced kerosene prices by over 80%. Amazon reduces retail margins. Google provides free search. But here's the trade-off. Lower prices today, higher concentration tomorrow, and concentration compounds. When wealth consolidates, political influence follows. Lobbying budgets expand, campaign contributions increase, regulatory language shifts subtly, barriers to entry rise. Small competitors face higher compliance costs. Large corporations absorb them. The cycle reinforces itself. And the average consumer experiences something subtle. Convenience increases, choice narrows, power centralizes. You feel free because you can choose between brands, but the brands often share ownership structures. The system creates perceived diversity while maintaining structural control. And this is the illusion of competition. Now ask a harder question. Why hasn't the system collapsed? Because it delivers results. You get fast shipping, cheap electronics, reliable search, abundant fuel, available medicine. The Rockefeller system trades decentralization for efficiency, and consumers accept the trade until crisis exposes fragility. When supply chains break, as seen during global disruptions in 2020 and beyond, centralized systems amplify shocks. When one dominant logistics provider slows, ripple effects spread globally. When pharmaceutical production concentrates in limited regions, shortages cascade. Efficiency reduces redundancy. Redundancy provides resilience. Rockefeller prioritized efficiency. Modern capitalism inherited that bias. The result is a global economy optimized for cost, not durability. And yet the system persists, because concentration is profitable, and profit funds influence. Influence preserves concentration. This is not moral condemnation, it is structural observation. Rockefeller built a machine, the machine evolved. The machine now governs global commerce. You can resist it, you can ignore it, or you can understand it, but you cannot avoid it. Because the architecture is not optional. It is embedded in corporate law, embedded in supply chains, embedded in global finance. The Rockefeller system does not require Rockefeller. It requires incentives, and incentives remain unchanged. Efficiency rewards scale. Scale rewards consolidation. Consolidation rewards control. And control rewards capital. Which leads to the final question. If the system is efficient but extractive, if it concentrates wealth but delivers convenience, if it is legal, normalized, and deeply entrenched, what does survival inside it actually look like? A survival question, fighting the system or using it. By the time you understand the Rockefeller system, the first instinct is emotional. Anger, resentment, a sense of being trapped. It feels unfair. A handful of corporations dominate entire industries. Regulators seem compromised. Competition feels performative. But Rockefeller understood something deeper than power. He understood inevitability. Consolidation is not just strategy, it is gravity. In every industry where scale matters, power compresses, retail compresses, banking compresses, technology compresses, energy compresses, because scale lowers costs. Lower costs eliminate competitors. Eliminated competitors increase scale further. It is a feedback loop. And once the loop begins, it accelerates. So the real question isn't, is the system fair? The real question is, what position do you occupy inside it? There are three broad responses. 1. Fight it. You can resist consolidation, support antitrust enforcement, shop local, use independent platforms, vote for policymakers who promise breakups. Historically, resistance has worked temporarily. Standard Oil was broken up. AT&T was broken up in 1984. Microsoft faced antitrust lawsuits in the 1990s. But here's what history shows. Breakups rarely destroy systems. They reorganize them. After AT&T was broken up, telecom reconsolidated. After Standard Oil was split into 34 companies, those companies eventually merged again. After Microsoft faced regulation, new tech monopolies formed. The system adapts. Resistance slows consolidation. It rarely reverses it permanently. 2. Ignore it. Most people choose this path. They prioritize convenience. They use Amazon because it's easy. They use Google because it works. They bank with large institutions because they feel stable. They do not analyze structure. They accept efficiency. And for many, life improves materially. Shipping gets faster, prices stay low, information flows freely. This path is comfortable, but it places you permanently in the role of consumer, not owner. 3. Position within it. This is the least emotional option, and historically, the most profitable. Rockefeller didn't just sell oil. He owned the structure that controlled oil. The modern equivalent isn't running a refinery, it's owning equity. Look at the S&P 500. The top 10 companies account for an enormous share of total returns. Why? Because consolidation compounds. And when markets centralize, profits concentrate. And when profits concentrate, stock ownership becomes leverage. If the Rockefeller system extracts wealth through dominant corporations, then ownership of those corporations flips the equation. You move from being extracted to participating in extraction. This is not moral endorsement, it's structural awareness. If Exxon, Chevron, Amazon, Alphabet, Pfizer, and JP Morgan dominate economic flows, then capital ownership within them mirrors Rockefeller's own strategy. He owned the pipeline. You can own shares of the pipeline. This is not a guarantee of wealth. It is an acknowledgement of power flow. Capital flows upward in consolidated systems. If you hold no equity, you remain downstream. If you hold ownership, even partial, you capture a fraction of that upward flow. Now, here's the uncomfortable truth. The Rockefeller system survives because it aligns incentives. Consumers want convenience, investors want returns, politicians want campaign funding, corporations want growth. The system satisfies all four until it doesn't. Because consolidation has limits. When dominance becomes too extreme, political backlash forms. When wealth inequality widens too far, social pressure rises. When innovation slows under monopoly control, productivity declines. Rockefeller's system is powerful, but it is not immune to entropy. The question for 2026 and beyond isn't whether consolidation continues. It's whether consolidation reaches destabilizing thresholds. History shows oscillation. Consolidation, backlash, breakup, reconsolidation. The cycle repeats. Standard Oil, antitrust, reconsolidation. Telecom, breakup, telecom mergers. Banking, crisis, regulation. Megabanks larger than before. The pattern is clear. Concentration is corrected, then rebuilt. You're living in a consolidation phase, and phases eventually shift. The survival question isn't ideological, it's strategic. Do you attempt to dismantle the system from outside? Do you passively live inside it? Or do you understand it deeply enough to navigate transitions? Because here's what Rockefeller truly mastered. He didn't just build dominance, he anticipated regulation, he structured breakups in ways that preserved wealth, he created foundations that preserved influence, he embedded his system in law, he thought in decades. That is the deeper lesson. Think structurally, think long-term, think beyond outrage. The Rockefeller system rewards patience and punishes ignorance, which brings us to the final layer. If consolidation is structural, if efficiency drives dominance, if regulation reorganizes but rarely destroys power, then what happens when technology accelerates consolidation beyond anything Rockefeller could have imagined? That is the next phase, and it may be the most powerful one yet. The endgame, Rockefeller's system in the age of algorithms. Rockefeller built pipelines. Today's monopolies build platforms. But the principle is identical. Control the flow. In 1870, the flow was oil. In 2026, the flow is data. Data is the new crude. Cloud servers are the new refineries. Algorithms are the new railroads. And the companies that control them are not just corporations. They are infrastructures. Rockefeller understood something fundamental. If you control the infrastructure, you control the economy built on top of it. Standard Oil didn't just sell kerosene, it controlled transportation, storage, refining, and distribution. Amazon doesn't just sell products, it controls logistics, cloud infrastructure, and digital storefronts. Google doesn't just index websites, it controls the gateway to information. Meta doesn't just host social media, it controls attention. JP Morgan doesn't just issue loans, it controls financial plumbing. And once infrastructure becomes centralized, alternatives struggle to survive. This is the modern form of vertical integration, only now it's digital. And digital consolidation is even more powerful than industrial consolidation, because it scales globally in seconds. Rockefeller needed railroads and tank cars. Modern corporations need servers and software. The speed of dominance has accelerated, but the blueprint hasn't changed. Vertical integration, horizontal consolidation, regulatory influence, philanthropic legitimacy. Rockefeller would recognize every move. He would recognize lobbying strategies. He would recognize acquisition tactics. He would recognize the use of foundations to shape policy. He would recognize the illusion of competition in oligopolies. What he could not have imagined is the scale. Standard Oil controlled 90% of refining in one country. Google controls over 90% of global search. Meta controls billions of users across continents. Amazon's cloud hosts massive portions of the internet itself. The concentration today is planetary. And here is the deeper truth. The Rockefeller system has fused with technology. When monopoly meets algorithms, the system becomes self-reinforcing. Data improves products. Better products attract more users. More users generate more data. It is a flywheel. Rockefeller built cost advantages. Modern platforms build network advantages. Both eliminate competition. But digital monopolies have an additional layer. They shape perception. When information itself flows through centralized channels, influence compounds. Oil controlled energy. Data controls awareness. That is why this phase feels more pervasive than the industrial era. The system is no longer just extracting money. It is shaping behavior. And yet, despite its power, it remains built on the same foundation. Efficiency wins. Consumers reward convenience. Markets reward profitability. Capital rewards scale. The Rockefeller system thrives because it aligns with human incentives. Which leads to the final insight. You do not live in a chaotic capitalist landscape. You live inside a structured architecture of consolidation. an architecture built in Cleveland in the 1870s, an architecture refined through trusts in 1882, an architecture tested in court in 1911, an architecture embedded in corporate law, tax codes, and regulatory frameworks, and an architecture now accelerated by artificial intelligence and digital networks. The question is not whether this system continues. The question is whether you understand it deeply enough to navigate it. Because consolidation will not stop. It will adapt. It will digitize further. It will globalize further. It will integrate further. Unless political forces intervene in ways history suggests are temporary. Rockefeller died in 1937, but his architecture never did. It simply evolved. You buy gasoline. You scroll social feeds. You search online. You stream entertainment. You receive medical treatment. You use banking services. Every action flows through systems designed for concentration. This is not a conspiracy. It is structure. And structure determines outcomes. If you see the structure, you gain leverage. If you ignore it, you remain subject to it. Understanding systems changes your position inside them. It allows you to anticipate consolidation cycles. It allows you to anticipate regulatory waves. It allows you to anticipate technological shifts. Rockefeller did not become powerful by reacting. He became powerful by thinking structurally. If this series changed how you see corporate power, if you now recognize the Rockefeller blueprint in modern institutions, if you see vertical integration and consolidation everywhere, then you're beginning to see the system. And seeing the system is step one. If you want deeper breakdowns like this, where we decode the structures shaping markets, corporations, and global power, make sure you like this video so more people can understand what's actually happening beneath the surface, and subscribe to this channel, because once you understand the system, you start spotting patterns everywhere. And patterns are where power hides. Welcome to Rockefeller's world. You've been living in it all along.